I'm Dane Rose, and I want to thank you for joining me for week 25 in this year of high growth and exploration and success aimed at your well-being. Contribute something of who you are. And as an aside, this is intended to be watched in order, so I'd recommend starting with video number 1, the 80-20 principle. Contribute something of who you are. So for this week's project, I want to suggest that you review what's going on in your life right now. And I guess the first place to start with is, do you have a sense of what is uniquely you? I call it presence or an energy signature, the signature that this is me. And the distinctions that we're looking at is the way that I see it is kind of when we arrive with a certain energy signature that is us. And then the culture takes a big slice out of that by inserting itself with a brainwashing protocol that says, men are this, women are this, modern people are like this, professional people are like this, a whole bunch of shoulds and rules that warp this sense of who we actually are into what is appropriate within the culture. And so it takes a big slice of somewhere between 25 and 75% of who we are just out of the picture because it doesn't fit in those boxes. This, of course, is traumatic. And the method that a culture or cult uses to insert itself over our kind of core energy signature is often trauma. You don't do this, you won't be popular, you'll be excluded, you'll be bullied, you'll be on the outside, no one will love you, you'll be alone and lonely forever. You don't do this, you'll be broke, no one will hire you, you'll be a loser, you'll be alone and lonely forever. You don't do this, you won't be cool, we won't want you, no one will have sex with you, you'll be alone and lonely forever. And then do this, and everyone loves you, even if it's crazy. And so the culture comes in with, this is how to be. This is what girls are supposed to be like. This is what boys are supposed to look like, different roles. And they don't fit very well. You don't get a nation with 1 in 3 people having domestic violence, with 1 in 5 having a mental emotional disease, often low-grade depression, with suicide being one of the leading causes of death. I mean, when you have a culture that is so bad that people are saying, let's see, I could do this. They're going through 200 items that they could do, and the thing that's better than all of that is to leave the planet. This is not an enlightened culture. And you can't blame the individuals. They're clearly in touch with their pain, with their shame, with their exhaustion, with their depression, with their this, that, and the other. And they've had enough. So what I like to say is there's who you are, there's who you and I are, and then there's what the cult has demanded us to be in order to be accepted and survive. And as an infant, it is definitely key survival. And then there is the pain that gets created in that adaptation. Like, I'm a guy that loves playing with kids. In the United States, when I approach a kid, I've got about 10 seconds before the parent thinks I'm a pervert. So I've got follow my heart and play with the kids, or avoid the hostility of the parent, or avoid the hostility of the parent and block who I am down. It's not a this is not a, lose over here, win over here. It's lose this way or lose this way. And an inefficient culture, in the United States, we paranoid parents about strangers. Go back to last week's, video. It's actually incredibly empowering to teach children how to be competent and effective and use their discernment with strangers so that they can open up that vast resource. Everyone that can take you places you don't even know exist is a stranger. See, and the biggest problem I have with the cult program around strangers is it basically says strangers are dangerous. Okay. I'm not going to talk to you or get to know you. Why? Because you're a stranger. Therefore, you will remain a stranger. It's only logical. You're not going to talk to me. Would you know anything about? Therefore, you're going to remain dangerous. So you walk up to someone and say, hey, how about we talk about this? And they say, well, I don't know you. And it's like, you don't. You're absolutely right. This is an opportunity to know you. Well, I don't know you. Well, if the logic is that I don't know you, therefore I shouldn't know you, therefore I'm not going to know you, therefore I'm still not knowing you, you've just eliminated 99.99% of the population for a self-referencing logic that if strangers are that horrible, why keep them as strangers? Why not get to know them? Then they're not a stranger. And so we have these different cult programs. They're painful, by and large, painful. Less painful than being shamed and bullied and ostracized and unemployed and all that for doing perfectly reasonable things that the culture doesn't agree with, but they're still painful. So you have a coping strategy now so you have the invasion of the culture, then you have the pain of the culture, and then you have the coping strategy for dealing with the pain, because one of the things that goes on in cultures is they're never wrong. They're never wrong. They never apologize for causing all kinds of hardship for an individual. What I mean by this is, a generation ago, everyone was supposed to be lawyers and doctors, right? And now there's a lot of unemployed lawyers, and they're all being joked at as, we don't need more lawyers, etc. They just did what their culture said. You're more valuable if you're a lawyer. But no one's going back to those unemployed lawyers scrounging around doing this and that and the other and saying, we're so sorry, we told you to do that. You wanted to be a musician or whatever, and here you are unemployed as a lawyer. No, cultures are always right. And so there's a pushback, and everyone to some degree is complicit in protecting the culture from too much scrutiny. Like, why don't parents have a mental illness test as a prerequisite before having children? Like, why do we have to pass PTSD on to another generation just because our culture doesn't think it's worth a single piece of paper to do a diagnosis? Why? It's like, well, that's just the way it is. That's America. Freedom. Who gives a shit? What about the kids? Well, we're not going to talk about it. So you have the cult. You have the coping mechanism for dealing with the awkwardness, where you have people doing the most elaborately inane things because to do the intelligent thing is not appropriate within the culture. So you have people saying like, oh, I have to walk over this way so that I don't meet that person. Well, why can't you meet that person? Well, he really annoys me. So why can't you tell him he annoys you and clear it up and teach him how to? No, because that's not the way it's done. I've got to just spend my whole life avoiding. Well, I mean, is that intelligence? Hard to say. You have coping strategies for, blind spots and things within the culture areas that there's hurting. And one of the coping strategies is often addiction. If a culture is a very bad fit for a given temperament, for example, for the going back to an earlier video, the segment of the population, 10 to 20%, that is highly sensitive, a less sensitive and less feminine culture, such as American culture, is not generally a very good fit for that demographic of the global population. So there's going to be more pain, which can lead to addiction. Now, you want to get a sense of who are you that is just because everyone's doing it. That's not you, that's the culture. You want to get a sense of the pain that is your pain that is caused by the culture, meaning you're doing this because it feels shitty to be shamed and criticized if you don't do it, but it's painful to do it. And then you want to get a sense of what you do to manage the pain. Like, you tell your mom, this really hurts. She always changes the subject. That's so painful because it reminds you of one more situation where she's betraying the awareness of how it makes you feel to pretend that it's not even happening. She's so committed to not apologizing or this, that, and the other, that she'd rather pivot into a reality where your pain doesn't even exist by changing the subject rather than, oh, tell me about it, or, whatever. And so this is, maddening levels of pain. And when the culture gangs up on us in this area, like, your mother does this irritating thing, plus she's abusive, you talk about it, and everyone just says, don't talk about your mother that way. She's your mother, or whatever it is. And you have these complicit things. You even have the church saying, as it's a commandment of God that thou shalt have this feeling. I thought love came up naturally when people were nice to you and treated you well. I didn't know you could command someone to feel love for someone who's hurting you. But apparently God's up to it. And so you have these messages. And I want to suggest that none of this is you. The addiction is not you. The pain that you're feeling in the reality you're living is you. The culture is not you. And you can really see that. It's pretty profound when you travel. And you see all Americans, you can spot them, like they're like this. And one of the ironies of an American culture is that part of the American culture says that you're an individual. No one's going to tell you what to do. You're a badass, etc., etc. So you've got this culture that's telling you you're unique, you're special, you're number one, you're responsible, blah, blah, blah. It's all about you. But when you've got all 300 people all doing the exact same thing, you realize it has nothing to do with the individual. It has to do with the brainwashing of the culture that says, just because you happen to be born inside this border, this is who you are. And I see this very dramatically when I meet people that were raised in one place and born in another place. And I know how they would have behaved if they had been raised in this place. And I know how they behave when they're raised in this place. Or, and you have the extremes with twins and stuff. Culture is a big deal. And it has nothing to do with you. The fact that you are incredibly popular and know your way around a certain culture has nothing to do with you. And the fact that a culture absolutely hates you and casts you out has nothing to do with you. it has to do with that culture. So it's valuable to have a sense of who we are beyond culture, that even within my culture, this quality in me stands out. And I feel very lucky that I got that sense on psychedelics, because what psychedelics do is they clear out, first of all, the left brain, which is the acculturated brain, and it's the right brain, the more imaginative part, the more emotional part, that doesn't fit into any culture. It's more close to who you are. And the other thing I'm very grateful for is traveling, because, for example, Thailand is my favorite country, because the smiling, the presence, the playfulness, the warmth, the low stress, the courtesy makes me very, very happy relative to my own American culture. And so I spend a lot of time here. And I'm the exact same person in both places, though I'm more happy in Thailand. But if I behave the same way I am in Thailand and the United States, I get weird looks, I get rejected, this and that and the other. In Thailand, I get engaged with, going back to that kids analogy. In the US, I can play with a stranger's kids for 10 seconds before I get the evil eye. In Thailand, I can play with a stranger's kids for an hour. And I get celebrated. I get celebrated. Oh, you're an unusually intelligent foreigner. Of course kids are wonderful, and of course you want to play with them. And I get trusted. I don't get viewed as a pedophile or, anything like that by the women or the men or the parents, so it's just wonderful to actually be a human being and be able to engage. And so I get to see, well, my whole cultural upbringing is pushing me towards being more sociopathic. But I see I'm actually happier connecting in this way. So that gives me a sense that that's clearly not coming from my culture. It gets punished in my culture, but it gets celebrated over here, and I like this me more. That's a clue that that's you as opposed to the culture, or an adaptation to the culture. Often what addiction is deep pains within what you have to be and who you actually are. This is what you have to be to not be traumatized and shamed in this culture. But who you actually are is this, and there's a gap, and it's painful. I need something to take the edge off that pain. Sometimes it's perfectionism, sometimes it's blame, sometimes it's workaholism, sometimes it's drugs, sometimes it's alcohol. It numbs the pain of the gap of who I am and who I'm asked to be. So to contribute something of who you are, you get a sense of what that is, as this is me, number one. Number two, what can this part of me bring to the ecology, and where is that welcome? So, for example, the part that loves dogs and loves kids and stuff is welcome in Thailand. So I can contribute a part of me here that's a real me. And who are you in that realness, outside of the culture, outside of the adaptation, outside of the addiction, outside of whatever coping mechanism you do to get through the day? Who are you? And whether you find that in traveling, whether you find that in writing poetry, whether you find that in writing a detailed and nuanced diary, whether you find that in meditation, whether you find that doing all these exercises in some of the recent weeks, whether you find that with psychedelics, whether you find that with deep trauma therapy, when you have a sense of that, value that unique part of you that you came in with, It's not like it's changed. What happens is it gets obscured, and you come back to that, and this is me. This is the part of you that will make you happy, though it may be very sad to see how much of the acculturated life has obscured and pushed that down. What's a way that you can share what's uniquely you with your world? I'd love to hear if you take me up on this invitation, where it takes you, what you learn from it. I look forward to reading your response.